Hi everyone, we're going to be looking at the Urban Issues and Challenges London case study today. We're going to be continuing our look at our case studies, and this is our HIC example. So what are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at London. That's our HIC example. We're looking at many different things here. Its location, its importance, how it's changed over time, so its social economic mix, but also look at some regeneration and also some of the positives and negatives of that regeneration. So, London itself, why is it important? Well, on the screen I've given you some reasons why it's important, so if you pause and make some notes on that, you'll be able to see why London's important for us in the UK, but also around the world. So take a pause, and then when you resume, we'll be on the next slide. So, why is it important? Well, it provides media, communication network, is quality education, culture, entertainment and tourism, one of the main industries in London, but also legal and some medical facilities and some legal and medical research areas. So in 2015, London's population reached 8.6 million, which is the peak since 1939. However, in 1801, London had the largest population in the world with only a single million people. You can see that just over here my laser pointer is. From World War II, when the population decreased, many cities around the world grew rapidly and took London as the most populated. They got took over as most populated. I want you to pause there, and I want you to have a look at the questions I've got on the left-hand side here. Use the graph to help you, but we've got 3 questions. Give that a pause, and then have a little read of the graph to answer your questions. So, in terms of diversity, London's quite a diverse area. White is 45% of the population, which in the UK average is about half. The UK average there is about 87 to nearly 90%. In terms of the other nationalities, you've got white other, South Asian, black, mixed, and other. And you can see that on the left-hand side, we've got a Bricklayer Mosque in Spitalfields. Used to be a Protestant church, now it's a mosque, and it was also a synagogue in the past, demonstrating 3 changes of religion there. And it's the most diverse city in the UK. So I'll give it a pause, have a look on the right hand side about why people migrate to London and why it's popular, and then once you've finished making notes on that, resume. So let's have a look at Shoreditch, an area in the northeast of London that managed to go through a bit of regeneration, but also has a bit of a problem with something called gentrification, one of its consequences. So look at some of the images here. We see it's quite a cultural area. You can see a lot of, you could see graffiti or street art. You can see a gentleman on the top left the street gentlemen. They're sat there enjoying themselves on the street. You can see a lot of graffiti around them. You can see a lot of some pop art. You can see a lot of displays on the side of buildings. Of course, it looks quite an old area, and that's because it is. But it used to be heavily industrialised, but it's gone through an area of change. It's gone through regeneration. And we can see on the right-hand side some of the newer buildings on there. So this is what it used to look like. So you can see some of the rundown post-industrial areas. You've got a lot of weed and vegetation being grown there, and that's a problem. You need to get out, you need to de-weed the area, get rid of all the excess weeds and problems. And then the main problem is the contamination of this area. We can see it's quite an expensive area being in London, but there needs to be something happening. You cannot have boarded up shops. That's going to be having a dire consequence to the local economy, but also it's a dire consequence to the local environment. So, Shoreditch area outside London and close to the city centre demonstrates the sort of changes that happened around London and in some other UK cities. So, if you just pause that, take a couple of bullet points on the history of Shoreditch and what it's like today, and then we'll move on. So, give that a pause and note down a couple of points. So what are some of the opportunities and the problem with gentrification in Shoreditch? Well, it's got a lot of opportunities, especially in the high-tech industry, in the quaternary industry. But this has led to a problem of gentrification, and gentrification is the rise in property prices due to the change in population, and that ultimately leads to a rise in prices of other goods and services as well. So again, pop some notes down there and pop a note down of what gentrification is. So we've got a couple of ideas here about our London Dockland areas. London was huge for importing and exporting goods, especially around where Canary Wharf is today. However, after the industrial times, during our post-industrial economy, the area just wasn't quite doing as well. It didn't have as much economic boom, so it was actually in an area of decline. They started to close down by the 1970s, and then pretty much all of it was closed by the 1980s, leaving most industries gone as well. So in terms of the employment, we can see how it has changed. I'd like you to have a little look on the screen about the employment patterns within London. I'd like you to look at what London used to look like. So that sort of lighter shaded area was 1996, and the darker area is today. So I want you to take a pause, make a couple of notes on changing London's employment patterns, and answer our question on the right hand side. Using figure 15.22, outline how employment patterns in London have changed. So take a pause, answer that question with a couple of notes, and then we'll resume. So one of the ways that London actually has moved on from its post-industrial economy, trying to move towards its quaternary, but also solve some of the problems with a lack of public transport and increases in private transport, is a massive investment in this public transport. The demand for public transport in London is predicted to increase by 60% by 2050, so in about 30 years' time. It seems a long way off, but actually that improvement needs to be made soon. It takes a while to actually build things, and you can see from the bottom here where the majority of that investment is going to go. And a lot of that investment is going to go into some existing but also new railway systems. So I'd like us to think about Crossrail and what Crossrail actually provide. Can we note down in ranked order of importance in our book? Those on the left hand side, there's bullet points there. We've got 7 bullet points. I want to note those down and put them in order of importance. So which ones are going to have the high value, which ones are of the lower value, and then I want you to justify your number 1 and your number 7 there. And then I want you to just have a little think about some of the negative and positive impacts and criticisms of this Crossrail. So take a pause, rank these in order, and then we'll resume. So we'll look at some of the issues of a city, but also we're going to look at some of the solutions. And one of these is about London becoming a green city. We're looking at problems there with transport and having a Crossrail. We're looking at trying to have a integrated transport system. And we're also looking at London being quite a green and sustainable city. In fact, it's the most green city, capital city in the world. So I'll take a pause and I'll let you just write down a couple of those bullet points surrounding the spider diagram, and then we'll resume. So take a pause, note those down, and then we're going to move on. Again, you got a little bit more information to note down through notes on your urban greening. So I'll let you note that down, and then we're going to move on. So there's a little bit of inequality in London. So although we're looking at these solutions, and that's great, what's the actual situation now? If we look in Newham, the most deprived area within London, we can see that their life expectancy is about 8 years younger than somebody living in quite an affluent and wealthy area in Chelsea and Kensington. Again, you don't have to look very far there. You can look at female life expectancy is significantly higher. Same with unemployment, that's lower in Kensington, Chelsea, and much higher in Newham. You can see that with GCSE grids, but also with households earning a significant amount of money there, £60,000. So how can we actually become this green city? How can we actually solve this problem of building new houses? How can we actually solve the problem of inequality and the housing shortage? And we've got that here, so I'll let you pause and just note down about the brownfield sites and the greenfield sites. because our green belt and green field land is area that's not being developed on. Green belt is area surrounding the city. Brownfield is old industrial sites that have been built on before. So let you pause that and jot that down. Again, I'd like us to note down some of the positives and negative impacts of brownfield sites. So where you've wrote down definitions from the previous slide, again, I want you to think about two questions. What about brownfield sites are good and bad? What about some of the good and bad things about building on greenfield sites as well? Just take a pause, have a look at the slide. Again, I want you to take a pause and have a little look at answering this question on the screen. You can either bullet point your answer or you can go and write it out in full. But again, take a pause, read through some of the success criteria, and then we'll resume and look at the regeneration in the Olympics. So, the London Olympics was chosen to be in this area of the Lower Lee Valley. That was in 2012. It used to be an industrial hub, but then it started to get run down and has become a post-industrial area that's required a lot of investment. So why was this area chosen? Well, I'll let you note down some of the pointers on the screen. Your open space, industry, derelict land, water, transport and housing. So I'll let you jot that down. So take a pause and write that down. But what was the legacy of this area? Again, we can see some of the problems on the screen, and we can see where the solutions actually are. You can see some of the old areas have been redeveloped there into some new sports zones. Again, take a pause, jot that down. So what did the Olympics actually provide? Well, there was quite a few great things it provided. You've got the East Village there, you've got here East, New International Quarter, Aquatic Centre. So again, you might want to do this as a spider diagram and jot down what the Olympics actually managed to achieve for the local area. So I'll let you pop that down. And this is what I'd like us to finish on in comparing our regeneration. I want to think about some of our Dockland regeneration. That might be from some previous work or from our previous slide where we looked at the Docklands area, but also the Olympic regeneration. And I want you to think about which project has brought or is likely to bring more benefits. Even if you guys want to choose one in isolation, so just look at the Olympic regeneration. What's the Olympic regeneration actually provided for local people, large companies, people of the rest of London and the UK and the environment? Or what's the London Docklands done for all of those? So you can do that on its own, or you can do that in a comparison. That's completely, I'll let you have a little think about that. Just bullet point your responses. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that. You've paused, you've now answered some of your questions. That's great work, and I hope we've enjoyed it. What's stop tour looking at our regeneration, looking at our situation where we've come up with some solutions for London. So they will end it there. Thank you.